Welcome to another episode of A Come Together. All right, we are live again. Another episode come together. This one's a solo episode. I've had it's been a little while since I put out a solo episode or even a bunch of episodes in a week, and it's not entirely random. I will say that it has been an enormous amount going on in my life. Thankfully, my wife is literally due any minute now with our second, and we just had Passover holiday, which was a ton of amazing and well-needed family time. Uh, excuse me. I had my parents and my three younger brothers, 23, 18, and 14, come on down to Florida for the first half of the holiday. We went to my in-laws for the second half of the holiday with a lot of my sibling in-laws who are really, really awesome. We get along really well, and I love them. And we had a really, really wonderful time. And, and then obviously when you have one of these holidays, Jewish holidays, where and I've talked about this a bunch, and obviously if you're Jewish, then you're at least familiar with the notion that, when you have these holidays, the first 2 days and the last 2 days of the holidays are like Sabbath in the sense that you don't use electricity really, and you don't use phone. It's family time. A lot of time in synagogue. A lot of time praying, and it's really beautiful. It's actually a lot of fun, and it's really meaningful. And I really love one thing that I've come to grow to appreciate, and I think I had this really really awesome realization actually with my students and with school and teaching as well. I think one of the beauties of feeling like you're choosing your lifestyle is that you come to appreciate a lot of the depths and emotional relationship that you could certainly have with that religious experience. Now, religious experience obviously doesn't need to be a Jewish experience, and as much as it's experience that is spiritual, of higher order, of higher consciousness, of higher power, and you choosing to allow that to flow into your life and really. And when you are doing it not out of a sense of guilt and not out of a sense of shame, you have a lot more relationship and a lot more invested in it. And you see a lot more of yourself in the religion and how you benefit from participating in it. And this isn't a plea to become religious, in as much as it's a plea to be intentional about the decisions that you make in the life that you choose. And just because you choose something that other people don't necessarily always do in the ideal manner, not that it's my place to judge who is doing what in any kind of ideal way, but I would say that I feel pretty confident that if you don't really feel like you have any connection to something and then you do it anyway, I don't necessarily know how great that is. I think that with Judaism in particular, there's a really, really interesting trajectory in terms of Jewish history as to how we got to where we are today. And, we have the fathers and the mothers of Judaism with Abraham, and Sarah, Yitzchak, and Rivka, Isaac and Rebecca, and Yaakov and or Jacob and Leah and Rachel or Rachel. And you have a whole bunch of very famous and historic and relevant characters to kind of all religions, at least all the obviously the Judeo-Christian ones, or the Abrahamic religions, I guess you could probably call it. It's a better term. They all have these characters in common, and one thing that they seem to be, all these characters seem to share, is that they seem to have their own kind of relationship with God without a lot of these commandments. And now they're obviously different, especially when it comes to the Jewish commentators and the people that understand all the in between the texts and all the nuance of the text. They'll say there's larger conversations as to whether or not there were commandments, and if so, to what extent. But I mean, for the most part, the text itself, the actual, if you actually look at the Old Testament, the Bible, the Chumash, whatever you want to call it, if you actually look at it, there really are very few commandments that are actually provided to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Yosef, Joseph, and Moses, and Aaron, and Moshe, and Aaron. Yeah, they don't really have so many commandments, and you kind of only get that towards the end of the book of Exodus or Shemot, and it's not even ever really Moses was never really told about the commandments that he was going to get. There was basically an essential, what's called a brit or a covenant, which seems to be a commitment to a certain lifestyle. And then as the Jewish people have become, grew and became a nation as opposed to a collection of individuals, we needed something to keep people in lockstep to help them discover a lot of the philosophy. And I think a lot of philosophy could be discovered through action. In other words, for example, if someone told me, hey, it's really important to work hard at something. It's really, really important to be invested in something and to put all your effort into in order for it to go well, in order for you to really see it through and make sure that whatever project you're working on is done to the best degree that it could be accomplished. Um, it's one thing to hear it, it's another thing to actually work it, experience it yourself, and then come to those conclusions by yourself and say, oh, right. I always knew that idea in my head, but I never actually understood exactly how meaningful and how valuable that is. And now I've really, really internalized it, and it speaks to me not only intellectually, but it's actually in line with how I feel about the world and how I feel about life. And I think, and obviously an enormous amount of life, it's strife, it's conflict, it's communications and miscommunications. A lot of that is really chalked up to the disconnect between where our heads are and where our feelings are and where our brains are and where our heart is. And so when you can kind of get those synced up, and when you do eventually get those synced up, then you attain a much higher level of awareness and consciousness and meaning in your life, or at least that's what I found. And so if you kind of look at religious obligations and religion in general from this lens, and you say, well, there's an ultimate goal that we're trying to achieve, which is godliness or something close to it. And obviously there's a lot of different variations and definitions of what godliness would be, right? Godliness is charity, but godliness is also, and kindness, but it's also judgment, and it's also uh, freedom and fun and being strict at certain points. And it's kind of it's kind of knowing where to apply what traits to and when to apply them. And if we have a formal list of instructions and guides to tell us how to behave when we behave, and when to behave rather, and how to have our relationship with the people around you, with the plants around you, with your home, with your property, with your family, with your friends, with your community, and you have these instructions on how to have these relationships, eventually, hopefully, I think what the goal is for people to come to the conclusion that that there's a reason why we're doing all these mechanics. And you could be a mechanical religious person, or you could be a emotionally understanding religious person, and you can actually achieve both of them. And that's kind of what I try to strive for. I hope that all this is making sense, because I really didn't even intend to speak about this at all. When I started taking notes on what to talk about today, I had a bunch of ideas. That was just, I guess, what kind of came rolling to the forefront, this whole notion. And that's all to say that things have been busy, and I have been really thinking a lot about what place in my life do the activities that I engage in serve, and what place do they have? And I think that for a long time, at least for the better part of the last 9-10 months, my emphasis has been on just putting out content on this podcast and just consistently posting and consistently being on top of it. And I think that's and I think that that is certainly one type of talk show and one type of podcast. There are plenty of podcasts that I listen to where the bulk of the episodes are primarily one person talking and one person rambling, kind of the way I am right now, about various topics and what their thoughts on them are. And the goal of the podcast is kind of to build up this kind of sense of community, shared perspective, to kind of create yourself to be some kind of established or authority figure in some kind of area, and you could go to, again, the typical podcast that I love calling out, Matt Bellany with The Town is a guy that talks either solo or with a guest exclusively about the entertainment business and entertainment industry. And he could do that by himself, or he could do that with his guests, but that's the scope of the podcast. It's within those realms. And then you have those talk shows that are guest oriented, where the podcast host serves as a mediator, or the brains behind behind the conversation, and the mediator and the moderator will kind of pick the flow and direct the flow of information that someone else is providing. So, for example, when I was doing my podcast with Dr. Andrea Corn the other day, I guess last week now at this point, she has all the information, she has the valuable goods, and what I'm providing is the channels in which that information is. I'm providing direction in which the information that she has is heading. So I'm kind of carving out this little, space for this information to flow, and I'm going to take it in the direction of the within the context that I'm particularly interested in, or that speaks to me. And that's a whole separate skill than just talking and rambling. And so on one hand, I feel like the solo episodes that I've been recording are great practice and great exercise for kind of building up uh, a online presence in which I can talk about a variety of topics for an extended period of time, elaborate my thoughts. I don't need to necessarily hear feedback, even though, I've spoken about this before. It's good to get feedback and it's good to read people's reactions and expressions. But what is the goal of the podcast going to be? Is it to be that talk show guy that talks for 45 minutes, three or four times a week? Or is it to be someone that shares and provides information? And even though I think the initial mission of Come Together was to do both of those, I think that it's really, really hard to do those well, especially on one podcast channel. And this kind of comes down to my experience in sales, and my experience in dealing with internet trends, which is to say, when I was starting off in the medical equipment world, I was 21, 22, just getting to know things, primarily being in my dad's voice and hands and footprint online, and basically communicating with him as to what should go online. I learned about the value of online real estate versus in-person real estate. And I learned about I learned about understanding consumers' habits and consumers' behavior. For example, right? When you have really good real estate and you're looking for an engagement ring in New York City, and you go to Fifth Avenue and you go to the Diamond District, and real estate's obviously crucial over there, but you could walk into a shop and then you could walk into 10 shops, because you know that all 10 shops are approximately a couple of steps from one another. And if you just take a few steps, then who knows what kind of deal you're going to get? Who knows how much money you could save? Who knows what kind of steel you're going to get? Who knows, how valuable and how pretty the next diamond is going to be, or the one that you like, or the one that your significant other will like. And so there's enormous value there. When it comes to online shopping, people's behavior is much different. I've noticed, and people are much less likely to go from they consider it. And I I'm actually subject to this myself, but we consider it strenuous to have to go from website to website, or link to link, or search engine link to search engine link, and we lose interest very quickly. And we're like, you know what? I don't want to do all this work to find out the best stupid price light bulb. I'll go to Amazon because they're the first one that's on there. I'll go to Walmart. I'll go to Home Depot because they're the first search result. And I can't imagine that, I mean, what am I going to save? The amount of effort it's going to cost me to look through who's selling all the light bulbs that I want to buy online. Um, the amount of effort it's going to take versus the amount of money that I'm going to save. What am I going to save? 50 cents, $1.50, $2, a couple of dollars maybe. I'd rather just buy it now from a company that I know and a company that I trust and a company that I've bought from 100 times before, and I'm going to stick with them. And so so online real estate is crucial in a really, really different way than in-person real estate. In-person kind of lends itself to foot traffic and people willing to shop around, trying to get a better deal because once they're out, they're already out. And then when people are home in their rooms, in their couch, in their beds, by the kitchen or dining room table, and they're, I just need to I just need to order a couple more. I just need to order some more toilet paper for the bathroom. You're not gonna do. You're gonna do the minimal amount of work that you need to do to get that toilet paper from from the internet to your doorstep. And and that's actually been part of Amazon's big philosophy, and part of what their customer service process is, and what they value so much is how simple is it to get from finding what you like to being able to pay and check out and have it delivered. How many steps does it take? Does it take 5 steps? You have to find what you like, add to cart, go to the page with your cart, put in your credit card information, join up, potentially as a member to this website, get the shipping and tax cost, and check out, get tracking information. That's 7 or 8 steps I just listed right there. And Amazon understood, and Amazon knew that the more work you're going to have to go through to get the quality substance that you want, or the more work you're going to have to go to get anything that you want, the less likely you actually are to convert and less likely you actually are to check out and buy it. And so, for example, if I were to go online and I were to look for a Grateful Dead hoodie, I might find a really cool one on Etsy, but it might be so hard, it might be so arduous to order it. There's so many steps to order it that that I would likely at some point in the process just leave Etsy's website altogether and just go to Amazon, find it really quickly, and just have it paid for without having to put in my credit card and deal with any of the headaches. Now, obviously, of course, all the other companies have since attempted at least to follow Amazon's process, but all this is a really roundabout way of saying, when I have really good quality guests, which I always do, and I really, really feel very strongly about that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this. When I have really good quality guests, I don't want to make it hard for the listeners to find those episodes, and it becomes strenuous and it becomes hard work for the listeners to have to sift through the episodes that I'm putting out, the solo episodes, if that's not necessarily what they're interested in and what they're looking for. It becomes hard work for listeners to actually find the good content. So, and and the reason why I say good content, I'm just referring to, I think I put a little bit higher value on my conversations with other guests than I do with myself. I think that other people typically have more to offer than I have, and what I have to offer is best served with the company of another person. So even though I do enjoy these solo episodes, even though I love them, I'm really thinking of taking a step back just to make it easier for you, for the listener, to really get to the good content. And one of the ways that I discovered this was when I reach out to potential new guests and I reach out to people to join the podcast and come on for an episode. One of the things that I do is I give a quick summary about myself. I give a quick summary about the show and why I'm interested in who the person is that I'm reaching out to. And then I'll say, and if you want to kind of get a feel for the conversation and got to get a feel for the flow of the conversation, here's a couple of people that I've interviewed that you could listen to. You might enjoy the conversation. You could kind of see where we are, how the flow of the conversation works, and then you could decide to do this. And obviously, which episodes I send, vary on the guest, right? If I'm talking to a historian, if I'm reaching out to an historian, I'm not necessarily going to send a psychologist or a musician their way. If I am going to speak to a psychologist, then I'm going to send an episode like Andrea Korn or Ryan Wagner's episode over to that particular professional. So, and then so while I'm going through these processes, I've noticed that it's become a little bit harder and harder for me to go through all my episodes and find the guests that the potential new guest will be interested in listening to and hearing, that will make them say, okay, I want to come on too. And part of what I've found is that I don't like to send my personal episodes over to these people. I don't like to, I like when I'm sending someone over when I'm sending an invitation to have a conversation based podcast, a solo episode isn't necessarily going to be the best way to market that. So I think that I'm going to cut out the solo episodes. It might come at the cost of how frequently I post new updates, especially as I've kind of shifted the type of guests that I'm getting to be people that I have a personal relationship with, to people that I don't necessarily know yet, but I would like to meet and I would like to learn more about and I'd like to hear more about. Um, and so I really just think that in general, that is going to be the new trend going forward. So there's going to be a few less solo episodes. They're going to be they're going to be kind of thrown in and sprinkled in among primarily guest episodes. But with after this past week of really taking some time to think about it, I really think that that's going to be the best way to go about it. The other, there's two other things I want to really talk about today. I don't know if I'm going to have the time to get to both, although I probably do have the time. Let's see how I feel about talking for all that time. One of the things that I realized, actually, I spoke to my students about, I couldn't do this with all my classes. I had to speak to the class full of students that already know me and that I already know and I already understand. But one of the things that really I was having a hard time with when it came to teaching the last couple of months, and I really didn't really I don't think I was quite able to put my finger on this until I talked this out with my mom over Passover again, over Pesach. One of the things, I was talking to her, and I realized that in tandem and in theme, in conjunction with the theme of pursuing pursuing a meaningful spiritual religious life, not out of guilt, but out of free choice and with warmth and with enthusiasm, and really with the sense of I'm choosing to do this, not I have to do this. Um, I've tried to really live that way with almost everything else that I do. The people that I spend my time with, I do because I want to. I try not to do things because I have to do things. And the things that I want to do typically are the things of responsibilities. I want to help maintain my home. I want to help raise my child. I want to help take care of my pregnant wife when she's not feeling well. These are things that I want to do because I find beautiful, and I find them to be beautiful and fulfilling and valuable and good for me and good for them and good for my family and good for my community and good for the world around and good for everyone. And so when I engage in my responsibilities, and I don't do this 100% of the time, of course. I don't think anyone does, but I've been training myself, and I've been training myself for years. I mean, probably the better part of 20 years, to look at things like the things I do because I want to, and the things I don't do, it's because it's not for me. And one of the things that this obviously applies to, is my teaching, and I teach because I want to. I've talked about this so many times that I'm risking making you nauseous hearing about it again. But I teach because I love it. I teach because it's important. I teach because I think education is really one of the most important things on this planet. One of the most important things for humanity. And so when I teach, and when I prepare my classes and when I go to the classroom, I go in with an enhanced sense of I'm here because I want to do this. I'm here because I'm excited. I'm here because this really means so much to me, and I want to do the best job possible. What I didn't think about for so long, unfortunately, is that it in every relationship, whether it's, 5 people to one person, or one person to one person, or 100 people to one person. In almost any relationship, there has to kind of be, especially for that relationship to be as fruitful and to fulfill as much of its potential as possible, there has to be coming together in a communion of perspective and a willingness to kind of grasp and work towards the same thing and achieve the same goal. And when I want to teach, I'm teaching because I know how important education is. I forgot to think about the fact that my 10th graders or my 12th graders, they're not in school because education is the most important thing to them. They're not in school because English class is so cool and so important. They're in school because they have to be. They're in school because they don't have a choice, because if they don't, then they'll get in trouble and their parents will yell at them and they won't get a good job and they won't go to college and they won't get a GED or they won't blah, blah, blah. And there's a million different things that there's a million reasons why they have to. And there's very few times in students' lives that they engage in a class because they choose to, and because they feel like it, and because it's important to them. That's considered a luxury, and sometimes you have a teacher and just by pure enthusiasm they get there. But one of the, I guess the realization that I came to recently was that I want them to come to my class from, I want the playing ground to be level, and I want the expectations and the understanding to be the same all around. That we're in this classroom right now to accomplish the same thing, to help all of us grow, to help all of us become refined, intelligent, mature, and enlightened people. And if you don't want to do that, then then who am I to kind of force you? And not only who am I to force you, but odds are you're probably going to ruin that for the other people around you. So what I gave this one particular, so the choice I laid out for this particular class is, there's 3 ways I could go about this last quarter, this last semester, this last I guess last month and a half, I guess, a change of school that there is. They can either not show up and fail. They could request to not show up to class for X amount of time, up to a week, and I will give them assignments to do on their own free time, and they can still get a good grade for doing that. And that way they're learning, so number one, they're learning. Number two, they have license over their time, the way they get to spend their time, the way they choose to spend at least those 45 minutes a day, um, which is a huge deal. Having 45 minutes a day where you feel like this time is your time and you could choose what to do with it. You could choose to be in class, you could choose to not, you could choose to practice guitar, you could choose to go for a run, you could choose to play basketball, you could choose to hang out with your friends and play video games, or you come to English class because you love English class and it's a lot of fun and we're going to learn a lot and we're going to do a lot. I think that having those 45 minutes of freedom could be enormously, enormously beneficial to these 10th graders, and to still be able to get the A by being responsible, choosing to do the work in their own time, and learning to be disciplined on their own, they'll end up getting to the exact same place that I want them to get anyway, which is English class, and class with me might not be for everyone. It's definitely not. It's not even for me all the time. I mean, I don't always love it. Um, English class is not always for everyone. Uh, but you should still have the opportunity to do well without having to be miserable, and you should still have the opportunity to do well and still have some freedom over over your life, and freedom over your time, and freedom over where you are. And I guess it's kind of the equivalent of being able to choose to work from home if you want. You gotta be able to show your boss that you were productive. You gotta show your boss that you're able to do something while you're working from home. But if you are able to do that, there's no reason why you can't work from your own living room, from your own couch, from the comfort of having to make your own coffee and take 20 minutes to make your own lunch or breakfast in the mornings or in the afternoons, and be as productive or more productive. It doesn't make any sense that should only apply to people once they're done with high school. If anything, we should start working on these traits of being disciplined and choosing to choose the time how we spend what time we have, and to choose to be productive about that. I think that is going to help these kids develop their discipline and responsibility and maturity in a lot more of an effective way rather than threatening them with A's or B's or C's. And then finally, obviously, the last option that the students would have is actually to come to class. But if they do come to class, to truly participate and to go and to come into the class with the same attitude that I have, which is we're here because you want to be, we're here because you want to learn, we're here because you want to be better people. And if you don't want to do that and you don't feel like doing that, you don't have to. You could still get a good grade as long as you're disciplined. And I think that kind of falls into all three kind of categories of the way that people live their lives. There are the people that don't take the chances. There are people that try to figure, that see the chance and prefer to do things their own way and kind of forge their own path and figure things out in their own unique and individual capacity. And then you have the people that actually do fit in the system and do enjoy it and do like it and they do want to participate in it. And they could succeed by thriving in that environment that's already being laid out for them. So fail, make your own environment or join an environment. But I think that that's pretty much the way that people function anyway. And that's what jobs are like. That's what responsibility is like. That's what choosing a profession is like. That's what choosing a marriage is like. That's what choosing a spouse is like. You know, how much work am I willing to do? Are we going to work together? Are we going to live two individual lives and just kind of work towards the same goals? There's a lot of different ways for these kind of things to succeed. And I think that you should make the terms clear before you begin and before you get started as to what the expectations are. So that was just something that I think is important for me to kind of talk out, and hopefully it could be a good educational tool that other people could try out and think about. Hopefully, this is something that makes you think about your own life and your own way that you work and the way that your own relationship to your freedom and to your liberty. Um, or not, and sometimes the best freedom and sometimes the best choice is to choose structure. And sometimes the best freedom is to be able to be able to say to yourself, the best freedom is a healthy environment, which a lot of people are working on the same things together, and I want to be a part of that. And now the last thing I wanted to talk about, and I hope to do a good job articulating this point. I wanted to talk about this whole Dave Smith controversy debate with Douglas Murray, and he's had a bunch of back and forths in the last week and change since he did his debate with Douglas Murray on Rogan's episode. And I have so many thoughts on this, and I think that the reason why, first of all, I'm only talking about this, I think, a week late is because I think that I think topics like these and conversations like these and even reactions like the ones that we've been seeing and experiencing, I think we need some time to let everything breathe and to kind of see what the zeitgeist is and what the world's reaction and what my thoughts are, and, kind of let everything settle a little bit. And I don't think, unfortunately, that any of these debates held in this manner are going to go anywhere. And in fact, unfortunately, um, and the only reason why I say unfortunately is because I do probably naively think that there's a world in which everyone could be happy and succeed. I just don't think I don't think we're willing to go there because I think that it's hard. I think that it's challenging. I think it's uncomfortable. And I think it requires a lot of concessions on everyone's part. Um, Dave Smith has a lethal weapon when it comes to debates, and that is that he only has one guiding star. He doesn't have several. He doesn't have religious affiliations necessarily, as far as I can tell from all that I consumed about him and all I've read. Excuse me. He doesn't have a political or personal, I guess, real. Um, he's not beholden to anyone, and he's not beholden to a religion, to a political party, to a philosophy, to an ideal, except for one, and that just is basic moral decency. And one of the things that fall under his umbrella of moral decencies is being anti-war, being anti-civilian deaths, and that's it. Let's just say that for the sake of his argument with Israel Palestine, or with America Iran, or with Russia Ukraine, or anything like that. The simple thing that Dave cares about more than anything, and the only thing that he cares about, is that there should be an absolute minimal amount of innocent death, um, to the greatest extent that we can make it. And anything more than that is evil and bad. And it doesn't make a difference whether this is someone that's his best friend. This doesn't make a difference whether this is his worst enemy. This doesn't make a difference if it's someone that he's supported, if it's a Jew, if it's an Arab, if it's a Christian. It doesn't make a difference to Dave Smith. He does not care. The only thing he cares about is libertarian ideas, basic morality, and that's it. And what he does so well is he's able to defy and reject most of people's rationalities and most of people's justifications when it comes to war, because of the fact that he's not tied down to anything else. So if he's not tied down to being to protecting a Jewish homeland, which he's not opposed to that by any means, by the way. And I think you'd be very hard pressed to find him say that he is, or to ever hear him say that. I've never heard him say that before. Now, you might argue that the paths that he goes down might lead to, less than optimal or ideal case for the Jewish people, and a less than ideal world, and you can have that conversation, you can have that debate. But from where things stand at the moment, the only thing that he cares about is put a stop to innocent death, and essentially the general premise that rising tides, lift all boats. And when he's been debating with everyone else, there's always been, everyone that he's debated has always had some kind of caveat, because they have another kind of personal investment that allows them to justify or rationalize one side over the other. And again, I'm not saying this is not I'm not expressing my opinions on anything. This is what I'm understanding from listening to these conversations, into these debates, that that Dave does not have any allegiance to anything except for unfettered, pure morality, that innocent women and children and elderly people and adults should not die for any reason. And by the way, and part of the reason actually that this has kind of really been hitting so close to home for me is because I think that as we've had a very, very tense last couple of years, in terms of global politics and foreign policy with America. And we were flirting, we were really flirting with a lot of potential wars that America could get involved in. We were flirting with the war, we're flirting with war with Russia, we're flirting with war with China, we're flirting with war with Iran. And now I'm not personally invested in any of this. I'm not personally invested in America's war with, in America's, in Russia and Ukraine. I understand that there are things that matter. I understand that, that there are larger, more philosophical and global implications that, maybe I'm not considering. But one thing that I'm really not willing to do is to sacrifice myself and my family and my kids for a war in Russia and Ukraine. Uh, Simple as that. And I think that I'm entitled to that opinion. I think that, as someone that lives in South Florida that has built a life that pretty much revolves around trying to build up the world, right? To teach, to support a family, to be part of a community, to practice spirituality and to be physically healthy, and to try to have as many different extended type of communities and people in my life as possible. I don't really care about that war. I want to keep on living my life and raise my family and, and do my thing. And I can't imagine the idea that if if South Florida got bombed as a consequence of American policies with war with Russia, um, I'm not okay with saying that, oh, well, this is just a casualty of war and this is just what happens. And Dave Smith's argument is, what makes you different than those people? What makes you different than Palestinians that didn't choose for Hamas to attack Israel on October 7th? Obviously his point goes a little further back than that. And that's actually probably where I would try and, um, make my strongest arguments, which is, even though, yes, of course, no history started the day of an attack. So let's say history didn't start October 7th is his big argument, which does have a lot of a lot of good points to it. But it could be, and actually, I actually think that Douglas Murray did do a really, really good job defending that particular part of the debate. One of the things that he said is just like, if you want to say that that Palestinian lives are less valuable than American lives, and so you're willing to play that kind of game with Palestinians and not Americans, then just say that's what your perspective is and that's where your values are, and then we could have a conversation as to whether or not that's legitimate. But the reason why Dave Smith has been winning all these arguments is because I think that rationalizations and justifications, at least to at least to, I think that people could pick up on that. And as much as people want to postulate, and as much as people want to say do the famous yeah but arguments, or the I forgot what the expression is, but for example, if you were to say that, if you were to argue with someone that Joe Biden was the worst president ever, and they respond that Donald Trump is the worst president ever, it ends up going into, well, whataboutisms. Oh yeah, well, Biden let in X amount of immigrants, and oh yeah, well, what about Trump during COVID, and oh yeah, well, what about this, and like none of that is a debate. That is an argument, and the people that tend to get into yeah but isms don't usually win arguments, especially not on public appeal, especially not to a group of people, because it doesn't sit right with people to say, yeah, but morality is this case, except for when it's against what I like right now. And so I think that he's been really sweeping the floor with everyone that he's been debating against, because I don't think anyone is able to come around and respond to this fundamental point that he's making, which is that any civilian death is not good, and the onus is on the person attacking, to make sure. Now, regardless of who started the war and regardless of what happened and all that, and again, I I am pro-Israel. Obviously, I've always been, and I love the country and I love the people. I love the place, and I my heart does truly, truly, truly go out to the people in Gaza that don't have a choice but to be part of this fight because of something that, and again, you want to you want to say that Hamas, that people in Gaza voted Hamas in. A very easy argument to take that apart is just that 50% of people in Gaza are under the age of 18, and they weren't even born to vote for Hamas. So a huge chunk of the people that are there. Now you want to talk about whether they're brainwashed and whether they're taught to hate Israel and whether they're taught to be violent and blah blah blah. We can have that conversation, and someone should have that conversation, and someone should bring that up in a debate where you can say that, I'm not saying that one human life is worth less than another human life, but but if you can't identify who's trying to kill you and who isn't, and who's trying to attack you and who isn't, then unfortunately I don't know what else to do. And then everyone can agree, hey, it sucks that everyone that innocent people that don't have anything to do with this are dying, but you at least now people like Douglas Murray or whoever else has kind of gotten into this whole thing on Twitter or on the podcast circuit. At least all of those people would be able to create some kind of understanding and empathy from the perspective of to make it more moral argument as opposed to a bunch of yeah but isms, where the answer could be, well, what would you do? You know, what do you do if you don't know whether 50% or 20% or 80% of Palestinians are for or against, Hamas's statement, which is essentially the annihilation of the Jewish people and America and the state of Israel. If you don't know how many people are there, what do you do, Dave? How many people support them? What do you do? What's your response to that? And then put the onus on him to have to say, well, yeah, if you say you hate, death, and you say you hate civilian casualties, and also, whatever. I didn't want to get to that. I'll get to that point in a second, but if you say, yeah, I hate all those things as much as you do, but we have no way of identifying who's innocent and who isn't, then you can really have a conversation. Then you could really start talking about it. And all the kind of, and the other thing that I think that has really, really lost Dave a lot of points. Sorry, not Dave. Has lost everyone, but Dave a lot of points. All the people that are fighting against him is they keep on going back to this stupid character assassination attempts, which is you're just a comedian, you're not a historian. Let me tell you something. Dave Smith is probably the most dynamic and colorful and passionate debater that I've heard in a very, very long time, because he has an enormous amount of knowledge on his hands, and he cares, and he has a very simple and relatable moral guiding star that a lot of people could get on board with, right? So you have passion, you have eloquence, you have morality, you have, and then other people are looking bad by not treating Dave Smith in good faith by saying, "Hey, man, I don't agree with your ideas. Let's talk about your ideas," instead of, "Excuse me, are you a professional? Are you a comedian? Are you not a comedian? What do you do? Shut up, guy." I mean, seriously, that kind of thing drives me nuts, because it doesn't help anyone get anywhere. It ends up hurting Israel. It ends up hurting Jews. It even ends up hurting Dave Smith to a certain extent, because he's talked about this before too. He's like, no matter what he does, they're a real anti-Semites online, that just because of the fact that Dave Smith is Jewish, no matter what he says about this war, he's still a Jew, no one ends up winning when we have these stupid, condescending confrontations instead of a real, real talking out of ideas, and to really, really try to get somewhere where I think that no one is willing to say this sucks for the innocent people, the innocent Palestinians, the innocent Israelis. It sucks to the people that have to live with the consequences of actions that are not made by them. They have no license over their lives. They have no license over whether their building or family or siblings or business or profession gets blown up today or tomorrow. Again, in both Israel and in Gaza. I mean, and you want to say that it's disproportionate, go ahead and say it's disproportionate. But no one wants to live like that. And if your basic sense of morality is innocent people should not be suffering for no reason, then it has to apply across the board, of course. Um, and I just think that we don't do ourselves any favors. And when I say we, I mean people that are Jewish or pro-Israel or pro-Jews, or we're not doing any favors by. It's 2025. We live in a world of abundance. We live in a world of technology. We live in a world of wealth. I don't think that there's any reason why we still have to go attack other people, call them names, try to discredit them by making fun of a way they make money, which is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. What? So I mean, let's say I'm an accountant for a living. I have a passion for history, and I spend 5 hours a day or 4 hours a day researching and writing and listening to podcasts and doing work. And I do it for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. What? Because I'm an accountant, I'm not allowed to have an opinion. I mean, the whole thing is so preposterous. But so the reason why I think that that Dave Smith has been winning all these debates, and by such a wide margin and so loudly, and especially online, isn't because he is irrefutably correct and there's absolutely no arguments that can be made against him. That's not the problem. The problem is that we're treating him like he's a 10-year-old, and we're treating him like he's just a stupid little kid that's not allowed to have an opinion. And not only is he allowed to have an opinion, he has good opinions, and he is talented, and he is intelligent, and he is an incredible orator. And so give the man the credit that the man deserves. Open yourself up to conversation, and also, like, I do think that there's a concept, especially in Judaism, we call it the Bible, the Torah. There's a written law and an oral law, and we call it a Torat Chaim. We call it a living Torah, and actually the word Torah is translated into instructions. And one of the reasons why it's called a living instruction book is, at least in my opinion, one of the reasons why is because this world is breathing and living and evolving. And so the applications have to, and even though our moral applications are rigid and don't move, we constantly need to be reassessing where the world is to line ourselves up with those values the best way that we could. And what was capable in warfare 10 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 100 years ago is not the same case as today. And if we claim to have these values, and if we do have these values, and we really love, and we really, really cherish these values, then we should go ahead, reassess the world, and say, hey, is there a way to do this in line with our values the best way that it could be? And Judaism is not against war, but it is against war for no reason. It's not against protecting yourself, but it is against, going too much, going too far, being too aggressive. That's not a show. A show of power is not dominating everyone. It's helping raise everyone. At least in my opinion, and you get that from any number of hundreds of examples of stories, in the Torah and throughout religion and history. And you could look at any amount of world leaders and say the guys that pick everyone up, or the one where everyone is able to succeed and be themselves. That's how you keep everyone together. That's how you get a society and a world to flourish. And just because things were done a certain way yesterday or a year ago or 10 years ago doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be the same way today. So I hope I articulated those thoughts well. Those are just, I guess, a couple of brief ideas. I want to get someone else on to kind of give me a little bit of a pushback on these particular notions. So maybe I'll try to get one of my friends on and we'll go back and forth about this. But I actually think it'll be a lot of fun. So that's going to be the episode for today. And as always, love you all. And it's we're gonna get some good episodes coming up soon. Doing a lot of work for you guys. If you haven't listened yet, Dr. Ryan Wagner was this past week, the chair of psychiatry and behavioral neuroscience at University of South Florida. We had an incredible episode. Ton of fun. I drove to Tampa and back in the same day to record it. And it was absolutely worth every minute in the car for that conversation. I also recorded with Dr. Professor Jan Sokol-Katz, the head of undergrad criminology and sociology at University of Miami. And finally, I recorded with Dr. Andrea Korn, and we had a really wonderful conversation as well, where we talked a lot about a really, really, she had such a cool and fascinating life and career, and so many out of the box steps along the way. And then kind of to see the portrait of her life and hear some real nuggets of wisdom and real valuable information in conjunction with an amazing life story is definitely worth diving into. Check out those episodes if you haven't yet. And we will see you again soon, hopefully another couple of times this week. Bye, everyone.